5 boys came running across the pickup lane outside Incheon International Airport, dodging a luggage cart, dodging a woman with a stroller, aiming straight for one man standing at the curb. "Dad! Dad!" Jaehyun's suitcase handle slipped out of his hand. The boys hit him at full speed, wrapping around his legs, his waist, one of them jumping to grab his arm. All 5 had the same round cheeks, the same dark curls, skin somewhere between his and something warmer. He had never seen a single one of their faces before in his life. He looked down at the smallest one gripping his hand, and the boy turned his palm over, pressing a small finger against a thin scar near Jaehyun's knuckle. "You said a dog did this," the boy said. "When you were little." Jaehyun's mouth opened. Nothing came out. 10 feet back, near a parked sedan, a woman stood without moving. She didn't call the boys back. She didn't explain. She just watched his face, like she'd been waiting years to see exactly this expression on it. "Before we begin, are you watching alone or with someone? Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Welcome to Afro-Korean Scope, where every story takes you on an unforgettable journey." 9 years earlier, in a hotel bar 3 blocks from a construction site in Houston, Jaehyun set 2 glasses down on a high-top table and slid one toward a woman he'd met 20 minutes earlier at the front desk. "I don't usually do this," Aaliyah said. "Do what? Drink water with a stranger? Let strangers buy me anything. It's tap water. I think you're safe." She almost smiled. Almost. He was in Houston for 8 months, overseeing a joint venture between his family's company and an American contractor. She worked the front desk at the hotel he'd been staying in for 6 weeks, and for 6 weeks he'd found some reason to walk past her desk twice a day. "You always take the long way to the elevator," she said. "Do I?" "Every day. Through the lobby. Past me. You could cut through the side hall." "The side hall doesn't have you in it." She laughed then. Actually laughed. And something in his chest loosened that he didn't know had been tight. They talked until the bar closed. Then they talked in the parking garage until his phone buzzed with a message from his assistant about a 6 a.m. call. Then they talked, leaning against her car until the sky started going gray at the edges. By the 4th month, he wasn't just taking the long way past her desk. He was staying 2 extra hours after work, sitting in the corner booth of the diner across the street from the site, waiting for her shift to end. By the 6th month, he'd stopped mentioning to his family exactly how long he intended to stay in Houston. "You'll go back eventually," she told him one night, lying against his chest in her apartment, the window cracked to let in the sound of traffic. "Men like you always go back." "Men like me? Rich, Korean, family with expectations. You say that like it's a diagnosis, isn't it?" He didn't answer right away. He traced small circles against her shoulder instead. "I'm not most men. Everybody says that right before they turn out to be most men." He turned his head and kissed her temple instead of arguing, because he didn't have a good comeback, and because some small, cowardly part of him already knew she might be right. 2 months later, he found out she was pregnant. He remembered exactly where he was standing when she told him. In her kitchen, both of them barefoot, the kettle just starting to whistle behind her. He remembered the way her voice shook on the second sentence, like she was bracing for him to leave the room. He didn't leave the room. He crossed it, both hands on her face, forehead against hers. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we figure it out. Just like that? Just like that." He meant it. He would replay that moment for the rest of his life, the certainty in his own voice, because 3 weeks later, his father called him back to Seoul for what was supposed to be a 2-week family emergency, and he never came back to Houston again. Not because he changed his mind, because somebody made sure he never got the chance to. He hadn't planned on staying in Seoul past the 2 weeks. His father had summoned him back for what he called a shareholder crisis, something about the family's construction arm losing a bid it shouldn't have lost, board members asking questions Jaehyun's father didn't want asked without his son in the room. Jaehyun sat through 6 days of meetings before he understood there was no crisis. There was only his father, watching him across a boardroom table, waiting to see if his son would bring up the woman in Houston first. Jaehyun brought her up on the 7th day. "I'm going back," he told his father, standing in the study of the family estate, late enough that the house had gone quiet around them. "She's pregnant. I'm going back to be there for it." His father didn't look up from the papers on his desk. You'll go back when the merger closes, not before. The merger doesn't need me in Seoul for 6 more weeks. It does now. Jae-hyun didn't understand yet what that sentence meant. He thought it was control, plain and simple, the same control his father had exercised his entire life, delaying, redirecting, never outright refusing, just making the timing always, endlessly inconvenient. He called Aaliyah every day for the first month, every day for the second. By the 3rd month, her number stopped connecting, and when he flew a company assistant to Houston to check on her apartment, the assistant came back and said she'd moved out weeks earlier, no forwarding address. He asked his father if the company had any record of her, any accounts, any paperwork tied to the joint venture that might list her. "Let it go," his father said. "She's made her choice clear. She wouldn't just disappear. People disappear when they're paid enough to." Jae-hyun stood very still in that study, staring at his father's face for a long moment, searching for something he desperately hoped wasn't there. He didn't find proof of anything that night, just a small, cold seed of doubt that he buried, because believing his father had done something unforgivable was worse, somehow, than believing the woman he loved had simply changed her mind about him. He spent the next 8 years building a life that didn't ask questions. A promotion, an apartment in Gangnam, a schedule with no space in it for wondering. Then his grandfather died, and the inheritance paperwork needed his signature, and the airline ticket back to Seoul from his most recent posting abroad happened to route him through Incheon on a Tuesday morning in spring. He had no idea, walking through those sliding doors, that the woman who disappeared 8 years ago was standing at the curb with 5 reasons why she never really left his life at all. Back at the airport, Jae-hyun knelt down slowly until he was eye level with the boy who'd touched his scar. "What's your name?" "Junho." The boy pointed at his brothers in quick succession. "That's Minjun, that's Doyoon, that's Siwoo, and that's Haram. We're the same age." "You're twins?" Junho frowned, like the question was stupid. "We're 5. Jae-hyun looked up at Aaliyah. She hadn't moved from her spot by the sedan, arms crossed loosely, watching him do the math in real time. 5, he repeated, standing slowly. "You're telling me—" "I'm not telling you anything yet." Aaliyah finally walked forward, stopping a few feet away, close enough that he could see she'd aged the way people age when the years have been hard, not soft. "Not here, not with them listening to every word." "Aaliyah, you'll want to sit down first," she said, "before I say anything else." He looked at the 5 small faces staring up at him, waiting, certain, unbothered by any of the impossible math running through his head. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. Where?" She nodded toward a cafe inside the terminal, glass-walled, half-empty at this hour. "In there, where there's cameras, where you can't tell me I'm lying about anything, because I'm not going to say a single thing I can't prove." Something about the way she said it, flat, prepared, like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in the mirror, told him this wasn't grief talking. This was a woman who had been waiting. They sat at a corner table, the boys spread across 2 chairs pushed together, immediately absorbed in a phone game. Aaliyah handed over without looking at it, clearly a practiced move to buy adult conversation time. "Start from the beginning," Jae-hyun said. "Please." Aaliyah wrapped both hands around a paper cup she hadn't touched. "I was 6 months pregnant when a man came to my new apartment. Said he worked for your family. Said he had a paternity test." Jae-hyun's stomach dropped. "What test? I never took a test. I know that now." Her voice stayed even, controlled, like she'd trained herself years ago not to let it shake. "I didn't know it then. He showed me results," said the baby. "We didn't know it was 5 yet. Wasn't yours. Said you'd requested the test yourself before you left." "That's not true. I never—" "I know," she said again, sharper this time. "I know that now, Jae-hyun. But I was 22, alone, 6 months pregnant, and the man in front of me had documents with a lab letterhead and a check for more money than I'd ever seen in my life. You took it. I took it." No apology in her voice. "I took it because I thought you'd already decided I wasn't worth coming back for. Because your calls had already stopped answering 3 weeks earlier, remember? So when a stranger showed up telling me the truth I already half believed, I didn't fight it. I just left." Jae-hyun sat back, both hands pressed against his face for a moment before he dropped them. "I called every day, for months. Then somebody made very sure those calls never reached me, Aaliyah said. Same as somebody made very sure I never reached you. Across the table, Junho looked up from the phone game just long enough to study his father's face, then went back to playing, unbothered, the way only a 4-year-old could be in the middle of his parents' entire buried history. I kept everything, Aaliyah said quietly, reaching into the diaper bag at her feet, pulling out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. The report. The one they gave me. I never threw it away. She set it on the table between them. Jaehyun unfolded it with hands that weren't quite steady and stared down at a laboratory letterhead he didn't recognize. A result he knew, with absolute, sick certainty, had never come from any test he'd taken. This is my father's signature, he said quietly, pointing to a line at the bottom he hadn't noticed until just now. Not on the report, on the authorization page behind it. Aaliyah went very still. You never showed anyone this page? He asked. I never looked past the first one, she said. I couldn't. Every time I tried, She stopped herself, jaw tight, and reached across the table instead, turning the folded stack over, so the second page faced up between them. His father's signature sat at the bottom in ink that hadn't faded the way the rest of the document had, like it had been added more recently than everything above it. Jaehyun looked up at her, and for the first time since the boys had come running toward him, his voice came out steady. Tell me everything you kept, he said. All of it. Because I think we're about to find out exactly how far my family went to make sure I never found you. Aaliyah reached back into the diaper bag and pulled out a second folder, thicker than the first, rubber band wrapped twice around it. This isn't everything, she said. Everything is in a storage unit. This is just what I carry. She set it on the table, but didn't open it yet, both hands flat on top, like she needed a second before she let him see inside. After the settlement, I moved twice in 6 months, first to Atlanta, then here, when a nursing agency offered me steady work and a visa sponsorship I couldn't turn down. She finally slid the folder toward him. I started writing things down the week the man first showed up at my door. Every visit, every dollar, every name he gave me, even though I found out later most of them were fake. Jaehyun opened the folder. Handwritten pages, dated, some water-stained, some crisp like they'd been rewritten more carefully after the fact. You knew this would matter someday, he said. I knew somebody needed proof someday. I didn't know if it'd be me who used it. She glanced at the boys, still hunched over the phone game. I did it for them, in case they ever asked who their father was, and I needed more than a story. Jaehyun read 3 pages in silence, a name repeated twice. Not his father's, a different one. Attorney's assistant present, uncomfortable. Left the room twice during the conversation. Who's this? He asked, tapping the page. I don't know her full name. Everyone called her Ms. Bay. She sat in on the second meeting, the one where they gave me the check. She didn't say much, but she looked like she wanted to. Jaehyun closed the folder slowly. I need to see all of it. The storage unit, everything. You'll see it, Aaliyah said, but not before you decide something first. What? Whether you're doing this because you actually want your sons, or because you're angry at your father, and this is a convenient place to put it. The question landed harder than she probably meant it to. Jaehyun looked at the boys. Junho glancing up again, checking his father's face the way kids do when they're too young to understand the stakes, but old enough to sense the weight in the air. I want them, Jaehyun said. I've wanted them since the second one grabbed my hand at the airport and told me about a scar I got from a dog when I was 7. I just didn't know they existed to want yet. Aaliyah studied his face a long moment, like she was checking it against a version of him she'd built and rebuilt in her head for 8 years. Okay, she said finally. Then, we do this the right way, together. The family estate sat on a hillside outside Seoul. Gates wrought iron, a driveway long enough that visitors could see the main house for a full minute before actually reaching it. Jaehyun's aunt, Soo-jin, met them at the door, tall, composed, the kind of poise that came from decades of never once being caught off guard in public, until now. Her eyes moved past Jaehyun to Aaliyah, then down to the 5 boys clustered behind her, and something happened in her face for exactly 1 second. Not confusion, not surprise at strangers, recognition. She recovered fast, smoothing her expression into polite blankness. But Jae-hyun had spent his whole life reading that face across dinner tables and boardrooms, and he knew exactly what he'd just seen. "Jae-hyun," she said, "you didn't mention you were bringing guests to the reading." "I didn't know I had guests to bring until this morning," he said, watching her carefully. "Aunt, this is Aaliyah, and these are my sons." Soo-jin's gaze flicked to the boys again, quick, clinical, like she was counting them without meaning to. "5," she said quietly. "You already knew that," Jae-hyun said, "didn't you?" "I don't know what you mean." "You didn't ask how many. You didn't ask whose they were. You looked at 5 4-year-old boys, and you already had the number in your head before I said it. If you're invested in this story already, go ahead and hit that like button, drop a comment telling us who you think is really behind all this, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Scope so you don't miss what happens next." Soo-jin's composure held, barely, a muscle working once in her jaw before she smoothed it away. "The will reading is in 20 minutes, she said, turning toward the house. "We can discuss whatever this is afterward." "We'll discuss it now," Jae-hyun said, and something in his voice made her stop walking. "Because I think you know exactly why a man showed up at Aaliyah's door in Houston 8 years ago with a fake paternity test and my father's signature on the authorization page behind it." Soo-jin turned back slowly. For the first time since they'd arrived, she didn't have a smooth answer ready. "Your father is dead," she said quietly. "Whatever you think happened, you can't ask him about it now." "I'm not asking him," Jae-hyun said. "I'm asking you, because you were the one who flinched just now, not me." Behind him, Junho tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, is this the bad lady?" The estate went very quiet. Soo-jin's eyes dropped to the boy, then lifted slowly back to Jae-hyun, and whatever careful denial she'd been building collapsed somewhere behind her eyes. "Get them inside," she said finally, voice tight. "All of you. We'll talk in my study, not out here where the staff can hear." Aaliyah's hand found Jae-hyun's arm as they followed her in. Not for comfort exactly, more like steadying herself for what was coming. "She knows," Aaliyah whispered. "She knows everything," Jae-hyun said. "The question is how much of it we can actually prove before she has time to bury it again." Soo-jin's study smelled like cedar and old paper. Shelves lined floor to ceiling, a single window looking out over the back gardens. She sat behind the desk instead of beside it, putting furniture between herself and the 5 boys now spread across her couch, absorbed again in the phone game. "Say what you came to say," she told Jae-hyun. He set the folded paternity report on her desk, the authorization page facing up. "My father's signature, not yours, not some lawyer's, his." Soo-jin didn't touch it. "Your father authorized a great many documents in his life. Did he authorize this one knowing it was fake? I wasn't in the room for every decision your father made, but you were in the room for this one." Jae-hyun leaned forward, both hands flat on the desk. Aaliyah described a man who visited her twice, once alone, once with an assistant present. A Ms. Bae. Something flickered across Soo-jin's face at the name, gone almost before it landed. "I don't know anyone by that name," she said. "You just did the thing again," Aaliyah said quietly from the doorway. "The flinch, same one you did outside." Soo-jin's composure cracked at the edges, just barely. "You have no idea what you're accusing me of." "Then tell us," Jae-hyun said. "Because right now all I have is a fake report, my father's real signature, and 8 years of your face, doing something you clearly don't want it to do." Soo-jin stood, walked to the window, back to them for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its polish. "Your father built this company from nothing his own father gave him," she said. "He spent 30 years making sure the succession was clean. No complications, no outside pressure on the board. I'm not a complication. I'm his son." "You were his only son at the time," Soo-jin said, turning back around. "One heir, groomed for 30 years, and then you called from Houston, telling him you were staying, telling him there was a woman, a baby. So he erased her. He protected the succession," Soo-jin said, like the distinction mattered to her more than it should. "There were already whispers on the board about instability, about whether you'd even come back to run things. A child with an American woman, mixed, illegitimate at the time. The board would have used it. Your father believed that. So you helped him." Soo-jin's silence was answer enough. "I found the assistant who handled the paperwork," Jaehyun said. Aaliyah kept a diary. Names, dates, dollar amounts. We're already tracking down Miss Bae. Sujin's jaw tightened. You won't find her. Why not? Because she left the country the same month, and your father made sure her severance came with conditions. So she's alive, Aaliyah said sharply. You know that for a fact. Sujin didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either, and that silence told them everything her words hadn't. Jaehyun straightened, looking at his aunt for a long moment, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in his life. The will reading is in 10 minutes. My cousin's expecting to hear how the shares get split now that grandfather's gone. Your cousin has nothing to do with this, doesn't he? Jaehyun's voice went quiet, careful. Because a scandal that removes me from succession benefits exactly one other person in that room. And I don't think it's you who profits from my absence, Aunt. I think it's him. Sujin's face did something complicated then. Not denial, not confirmation. Something closer to a woman realizing the ground she'd been standing on for 8 years had just shifted under her. Find the assistant, she said finally. Quiet, almost to herself. If you can, ask her what she saw. I won't stop you. That's not the same as helping. It's the only thing I'm willing to give you today, Sujin said, and walked past them toward the door, toward the will reading, toward a room where she'd have to sit across from her nephew and pretend, for a little while longer, that the ground beneath the whole family hadn't just cracked wide open. Aaliyah waited until she was gone before she spoke. She's scared, she said. Not guilty scared. Scared of something bigger than what she just told us. Yeah. Jaehyun looked down at the boys on the couch, oblivious, laughing at something on the phone screen. I think we just found the smallest piece of this, not the whole thing. That night, in the guest wing of the estate, Aaliyah sat cross-legged on the bed, with the boys finally asleep in the next room, the diary spread open across her lap. Jaehyun sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Read me the parts you haven't shown me yet, he said. She flipped past the first entries, the ones about the initial visit, and stopped on a page dated 3 weeks later. Second meeting, she read. Same man, different suit. Brought a woman this time, younger, introduced as an assistant. She didn't speak unless spoken to. When he slid the check across the table, she looked at the floor. When he asked me to sign, she looked at me instead, like she wanted to say something, and couldn't. Did she ever try? Once. On her way out, she touched my arm and said, I'm sorry. That's it. 2 words. I didn't understand what she meant until years later. Jaehyun took the diary gently, turning to a later page, one with a name circled twice in different ink, like Aaliyah had come back to it more than once. Bae Sua, he read aloud. You found her full name? Not then. Years later, a mutual friend from the hotel recognized her in a photo I still had. She'd worked for the law firm your family used, before she vanished from their staff directory completely. I wrote the name down and never did anything with it. Didn't know what to do with it. Until now. Until now, Aaliyah agreed. If you've made it this far, you already know this story's building to something big. Hit like, drop a comment on who you think Bae Sua really is to this family, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Scope so you're here for what happens next. Jaehyun pulled out his phone, dialed a number he'd gotten from a private investigator his assistant had quietly recommended that afternoon. Someone who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. I need you to locate someone, he said into the phone. Former legal assistant. Name's Bae Sua. Left a Seoul law firm roughly 8 years ago, may have left the country around the same time. A pause. Yes, I'll pay whatever it costs. I need this fast. He hung up and looked back at Aaliyah. He says 48 hours if she's still in the country, longer if she's not. And if we find her, then we ask her what she saw in that room, and we hope she's not still scared enough to lie about it. 2 towns outside Busan, in a small apartment above a laundromat, Bae Sua opened her door expecting a delivery and found a stranger standing there instead, a folder tucked under his arm. Ms. Bae, the investigator said, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here on behalf of a woman named Aaliyah and a man named Jae-hyun Han. The color left her face before he'd finished the sentence. I don't know those names, she said, already stepping back to close the door. You sat in a room 8 years ago, the investigator said quickly. while a man had a woman sign away her children based on a fake paternity test. You told her you were sorry on your way out. She wrote it down. She's kept a diary for 8 years, Ms. Bay. She's not looking to destroy you. She's looking for the truth. The door stopped closing. How is she? Bay Sua asked quietly. She's fine. The children are healthy. Their father just found out they exist 3 days ago. Something in the woman's face crumpled. Years of guilt she'd been carrying alone, finally cracking under the weight of someone actually asking. I was 24, she said, fresh out of law school. They told me it was a routine settlement. I didn't know it was fake until I saw the lab report myself, after the fact, and recognized the letterhead as one the firm used for a completely different client. By then, I'd already witnessed the signing. Would you be willing to say that, officially, to Jae-hyun's family? Bae Sua looked past him for a moment, toward the small apartment behind her, the quiet life she'd built 2 towns from where anyone might recognize her. They paid my severance on the condition I never spoke about it, she said. But I've spent 8 years imagining that woman's face every time I close my eyes. If she kept a diary this whole time hoping someone would ask, I'm not going to be the reason the answer stays buried. Back at the estate, Jae-hyun's phone rang at just past midnight. He answered on the first ring, Aaliyah already sitting up beside him. She'll talk, the investigator said. She wants to do it in person, on record, in front of whoever needs to hear it. Jae-hyun closed his eyes, relief and dread arriving at the same time. There's something else, the investigator added. The independent lab results you requested came back an hour ago, the real test. And? All 5 boys, 99.99% probability of paternity. They're yours, Mr. Han, no question left in it. Jae-hyun set the phone down slowly. Aaliyah watched his face, waiting. They're mine, he said. Confirmed. No fake report, no manufactured doubt, just fact. Aaliyah's composure, held so carefully for 8 years, finally slipped. Just slightly, just enough for him to see the exhaustion underneath it. I always knew, she said quietly. I just needed somebody else to know it too. Jae-hyun reached over and took her hand, the way he had 9 years ago in a kitchen in Houston, before either of them knew how much it would cost them to let go of it. You never have to carry this by yourself again, he said. Not the boys, not the proof, not any of it. For the first time since the airport, Aaliyah let herself lean into him, just slightly, just for a moment, before pulling back to check on the boys sleeping in the next room, like she still wasn't entirely sure it was safe to rest. The family gathered in the same room where the will had been read 3 days earlier, except this time the chairs were arranged differently, facing a small table where Bae Sua sat with her hands folded, the family's attorney beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Soo-jin sat at the head of the table. Jae-hyun's cousin, Tae-min, sat 2 chairs down, adjusting his cufflinks like the meeting was an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. Aaliyah sat beside Jae-hyun, the boys with a sitter back at the guest house this time. This wasn't a room for 4-year-olds. Ms. Bae, the attorney said carefully, you understand you're not obligated to say anything that violates your prior severance agreement. I understand, Bae Sua said. I'm choosing to anyway. She told it plainly. The first meeting she wasn't present for, only heard about after. The second meeting, the check, the fake report she recognized months later as sharing a letterhead template used for an unrelated client of the firm. The 2 words she'd said on her way out the door. The only act of conscience she'd managed in a room full of people telling her to stay quiet. Who authorized the report? Jae-hyun asked. Not who delivered it, who authorized it. The instructions came directly from your father, Bae Sua said. But the arrangements, travel, the settlement amount, the timeline, those came from Mr. Tae-min's office. The room went still. Tae-min's hand stopped moving on his cufflink. That's a lie. I have the correspondence, Bae Sua said, and nodded toward the attorney, who slid a folder across the table without meeting anyone's eyes. Emails between my old firm and Mr. Taemin's assistant. Dates, instructions, a specific figure for the settlement that I personally typed into the check. The attorney opened the folder and read the dates aloud, matching them, one by one, against the entries in Aaliyah's diary sitting beside it. Dates she'd written down 8 years ago, with no way of knowing they'd ever be checked against anything. Every single one matched. You knew about the pregnancy before your uncle even called Jae-hyun back from Houston, the attorney said slowly, looking up at Taemin. You started arranging the settlement before Mr. Han Sr. gave the final order. I was protecting the family, Taemin said, voice rising. Same as anyone would have. You were protecting your own path to the shares, Jae-hyun said quietly. If I stayed in Houston, married an American woman, had a family outside Korea, the board would have eventually pushed succession toward you instead of me. You didn't wait for grandfather to die to start planning for it. You started 8 years ago. Taemin's composure finally broke, not into confession, but into anger. You think this family was ever going to accept a mixed grandchild as the face of a 100-year company? I did what needed doing. Your father agreed with me. My father is dead, Jae-hyun said. He doesn't get to answer for it anymore. You do. Soo-jin, silent until now, finally spoke. I flinched at the airport because I recognized this whole thing unraveling the second I saw those boys' faces. Not because I orchestrated it, because I let it happen. I knew what your father did, and I said nothing, for 8 years, because it was easier than facing what it cost you. She looked at Aaliyah directly for the first time. That's not innocence, I know that, but it isn't the same as what he did. The attorney closed the folder slowly. Given the falsified documents, the coerced settlement, and now documented correspondence proving premeditation, this isn't a family dispute anymore. This is fraud. Coercion. Likely several other charges once the board's legal team reviews it. Taemin stood so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. You'd destroy this family over some woman from Houston and her... Careful, Jae-hyun said, voice low, final. Those are my sons you're about to finish that sentence about. Taemin walked out of the room, and nobody stopped him. The estate's garden sat quiet in the late afternoon, the boys chasing each other around a stone fountain, while Aaliyah watched from a bench. Stay, Jae-hyun said, sitting beside her. Not because of the company, not because of the inheritance. I just know I spent 8 years building a life specifically empty enough that nothing could hurt me again, and 3 days ago, 5 boys ran into that life and broke it wide open, and I have never once wanted to close it back up. You know this isn't simple, Aaliyah said. I know exactly what people are going to say. I stopped caring the moment Junho showed me that scar and told me the story I told him myself, years before I even knew he existed to be told it. That's not something people can argue with. That's just true. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and when she didn't, he kissed her, 9 years late, finally landing exactly where it should have the first time. Junho spotted them first. Are you guys getting married? One thing at a time, baby. Aaliyah laughed against Jae-hyun's mouth. That's not a no, Minjun pointed out. No, Jae-hyun agreed. It's not a no. 1 year later, the garden looked different. String lights instead of afternoon sun. A long table set for a small family gathering. The 5 boys, now 5 years old, chased each other around the same fountain, louder now, more coordinated in their chaos. Jae-hyun stood near the fountain, watching Aaliyah help Haram fix a paper lantern that had come untied. He thought about the airport. 5 boys running toward a man they'd never met, certain in a way that made no sense until it made all the sense in the world. He hadn't flown to Korea looking for family, he'd flown there for paperwork, for shares, for an inheritance measured in numbers on a legal document. He found out, standing in that garden 1 year later, watching Aaliyah's hand find his without either of them having to look for it, that the only inheritance that had ever actually mattered had been running toward him the whole time, shouting a word he didn't yet know he'd earned. If this story moved you, you already know what to do. Hit like, tell us in the comments what part hit you hardest, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Scope. Because this family's story might be over, but there's always another one waiting for you here.